face-to-face or online. Obviously there are benefits to both, and I'm just going to briefly cover some advantages and disadvantages to each, and then really open the conversation up and people can talk about their experiences or what their thoughts might be. Before I actually start, I did want to make a point that one of the obviously we've been talking about a lot of different tools and different ways of doing things, but none of this really means that what you've been doing to this point is there anything wrong with that, or that there isn't strengths there which you should be harnessing. So I would definitely encourage everyone, especially if you've been an academic for a very long period of time, you've been working with students for a long period of time, you have a range of built-up skills. Blended learning should really be enhancing that. It's not about throwing away what you've done so far and starting again. Okay, so firstly, face-to-face or online. So some strengths of face-to-face. It's easier to understand the learner. To gauge how they're doing. You can see straight away whether students are switched off or not within a lecture environment, if they've gone to sleep or whether they're very engaged, whereas it's a lot harder to do that online. It's a more collaborative environment, so you can have students talk to each other, discuss amongst themselves, and then come to some common discussions and points of view and talk about those. It's a lot easier to do that face-to-face. It's more motivating for some students. They like that human contact, which is the last point that I have there. It's easier for them to access face-to-face help and support. So a lot of people really need that human contact, that face-to-face, to be able to talk about what their problems are and how they might be solved. And obviously there's a lot of expertise there. Many faculty members would be very comfortable with the face-to-face arrangement. It's one of the strengths of Bond University. So when we're talking about online, some of the strengths of online, there's a lot more convenience and flexibility for students. They can choose when they want to log on, and as we've seen, a lot of students are accessing the iLearn course content at the early hours of the morning when hopefully everyone else is asleep. But that flexibility is one of the strengths of online. They're able to review the material easily and continuously, so any time they might decide that there's some information that they want to look at, they can go back and look at it, whereas obviously in a face-to-face situation it's harder for students to do that. But that said, I have actually seen some students sleeping through PowerPoints during a workshop or face-to-face session, but obviously it's a lot easier to do it in an online environment. It can be more motivating for some students. Particularly some international students, they mightn't feel comfortable talking face-to-face, whereas at home they can use the screen readers, they can reread over the work, there might be captions for a video. They don't have that ability to do that in a face-to-face environment. They might actually struggle to keep up with the language. Analytics and assessment is another online strength, and this is something which is really starting to take off, and you'll be hearing a lot more about it over the years. I know that the university is looking at heavily investing in the Blackboard analytics platform, and so hopefully we're getting more information about what each student is doing online and where their strengths are, where their weaknesses are. So you have all this data that you can use to influence decisions you might make about how you wish to proceed with your teaching with those students. And then obviously you can actually have a range of technical support resources, so videos, captions, lynda.com that we've talked about. Okay, Ron wants to make a comment there.
Hi everyone, my mic has finally kicked in. I'd just like to say one of the beautiful things about blended learning is it really does take us into an area where we can pick and choose. Blended learning gives us the choice of not face-to-face or online, but rather both. And we can choose bits and pieces from face-to-face when it suits the learning environment, when it suits what we want to learn, what we want to teach, and also the best of the online experience. And even to put those two together, a classic example of that is using back channels where you're in a face-to-face environment, such as a lecture theater, but you also have something like today's meet running in the virtual background. So the question of face-to-face or online, I suppose, has many meanings. The simplest is one or the other, which blended learning says, no, you can have both. At a higher level, face-to-face or online really says, in my arsenal of educational tools, what am I going to do today? So blended learning really makes the question of face-to-face or online not the simple either-or situation, but one where we're looking at which modality aligns best to the particular learning situation or the learning objectives, and even do I want to use more than one modalities in a particular learning environment?
I just wanted to make a slightly different take on Ron's take, sort of coming at it from the point of view of, say, an academic who's thinking about or preparing to incorporate blended learning into their subject, which I think many of us are. I think what we need to be doing is looking at the things that we're doing in the classroom at the moment, because most of us are still mainly focusing on face-to-face classroom teaching. But looking at each of the things we do and saying, well, is this really best done in the face-to-face environment in the live classroom, or am I doing something here that really can be done better online and freeing up a bit more time for what's happening in the classroom? So, you know, the obvious one, and the one that I guess the concept of the flipped classroom is built around is you know, this providing content to the students. We traditionally just talk at them for a couple of hours in a lecture, and this is where we start to ask, well, is there a better, more efficient way of providing the most of that information, perhaps in a video or in some other form online, and then free up some classroom time for some conversation?
Yeah, you make some excellent points there, and I think that's a big reason behind the movement to the flipped classroom approach, is that a lot of the things that we traditionally would do in the classroom are actually far better done at home, which it's really just about sharing content. Students can read quite happily at home or watch a video in their home time revision, and then when they come into the lecture, hopefully if they're really embracing the model, that they'll be prepared and ready to discuss with other students, and that's where a lot of real learning takes place, when they start to digest the information and give some feedback on what their thoughts are, what their concerns are with that information, and what does it really mean. So yeah, so I suppose in that sense it is a change, or there are ways that we can change in our approach. One of the other strategies that some people have been using at home, I think we briefly talked about slide docs as a great way to package content. So, I mean, I think everyone's got a great library of PowerPoint slides, but obviously often it can be too much information to share with the student in a face-to-face session. But you know, don't throw that resource away. That can be repackaged and provided to students as a revision tool that they can access anytime. All right, I might just move on to the second slide, which is really talking about some of the weaknesses of the two modalities, face-to-face or online. So with face-to-face, one of the big weaknesses is the pace of the lesson is set, and that basically means that you have a certain you know, pace set for the lesson, the amount of content that you want to get through, and off you go, and you try and get through as much of that as possible. And if students are struggling or not keeping up, it can be really hard to address that. At the same time, if some students are already understanding the basics of that content and they're really looking for something advanced, it can be really hard to offer that to those students at the same time. There are some impediments to engagement. Obviously, I talked briefly before about students struggling with language. International students might struggle to keep up with that. If they're sitting at the back of the lecture theatre, they might be easily distracted, or they might not be able to hear as well as some of the other students. So there's a range of things in a face-to-face environment which can actually result in students struggling to understand what's going on. And then obviously, if you're rushing through content, or you have a lot of content to get through, it can come across as dry at times, and some students can find that very disengaging. Scheduling is another weakness. With online, students can really access it any time if you're looking at an asynchronous online environment. Obviously, accessibility can be an issue with face-to-face. It can obviously be an issue with online as well. Some late students might struggle with the language, you know, wheelchairs, etc. There are technical problems with classroom tools, and I think everyone's been there, knows what I'm talking about, and you've got to come up with a plan B very quickly. If the projector's not working and your wonderfully prepared PowerPoint just seems to go out the window. Differentiation is more difficult, so That's the approach where you provide a different teaching or learning strategy for each student. You try and individualize it so that students are really working at the level that they're currently at, and that can be very hard to do in a face-to-face environment. Some of the weaknesses on online, students may just struggle with that model, particularly if they're not familiar with it and they may not be computer savvy. Just actually accessing online content and working through those materials can be a big struggle, especially because they don't have that face-to-face contact through that process. It can be a lot harder to develop community, and if you've ever tried to start a discussion forum amongst students, particularly in a small class, you've probably experienced that. It can be really hard. You might need to put a lot of effort in to really encourage students to participate. You might need to attach marks to it or a participation grade to actually get the students engaged and involved and to start communicating. Or one of the other things you can do is get an international speaker involved enough then to contribute to the conversation, but there's more work required, whereas if you have a face-to-face session and you have a guest speaker come in, you might end up with a really beautiful organic conversation and everyone gets involved. It's a lot easier for that to happen. Instructor workload is higher online. There's not really any way around it. The fact of the matter is you have to produce those materials and you generally want to put more effort into producing them because it's so critical to develop that engagement with students, and if there's not a lot of effort into the materials that they see, it's going to be harder for them to become engaged in that subject. Okay, Ron has a comment.
Hi, I think these are great points. I'd just like to say on the point you just mentioned, the instructor workload. I think in many ways we're at the stage where that's true, but as people develop the skills and develop the resources, that is going to be less and less a factor. I imagine when projectors and PowerPoints first arrived, people were saying a similar thing. They're saying, oh, now I have to make PowerPoints for each of my lessons, for each of my subjects. I've got these wonderful overhead projector resources already, and now I'm going to have to start from scratch. So I think as we sort of get used to it, as technology becomes more the norm, as it already is, that the workload issue will be lessened because those resources will be developed.
Yeah, just on that point, like at the moment I'm teaching a subject and I'm trying to build up a library of short videos around each of the topics that I cover in the subject, and yeah, it's taking a lot of my weekend time to record these short videos and edit them, but the whole time I'm deeply conscious of the fact that it's only going to take up a lot of time this semester, and next semester when I teach the subject I'll be reusing a lot of these videos, so it'll be a lot easier. So I mean, that's the point. It's kind of a heavy workload at the beginning, but it pays off in future versions of the subject when you get to reuse a lot of these resources.
Yeah, that's one of the unfortunate downsides initially, is it does require that initial investment of time, which does eventually get repaid. Once you've developed those resources, it's a lot easier the second time around, obviously assuming you're teaching the same subject or similar enough subject. But I mean, there's other ways you can address that. You could choose to not reinvent the wheel and use some existing resources, at least while you're getting up to speed. So there's a few ways you can address that, but I just don't think there's any way of getting away from that fact.
Sorry, I'll add to that just to say too, in terms of getting back to basics and thinking about making decisions in terms of what approach you're going to take in terms of embedding blended learning into your subject. I guess that it gets back to the importance of not trying to do the bigger than Ben-Hur approach, making really conscious decisions at the start when you do an audit of your subject and you look through the content. And we go back to that idea of constructive alignment, that you might make some specific decisions about what's doable and most valuable in terms of what you're going to work on first and foremost, and that what's going to be in terms of cost benefit. Like you're talking there, Nick, about, okay, well, if I invest this time in these videos, well, that's something that I'm actually going to be able to reuse, and it's going to have a high benefit for me in the long term. So, and that's something that OLT and our team can kind of help academics to make those decisions first off as well, so that you don't enter in boots and all into something that becomes overwhelming and does, you know, consume an enormous amount of your workload and make, you know, other things sort of suffer, you know, so it doesn't have to be at the detriment of other things. So we can help make those decisions and sort of go through almost as an audit, you know, looking at your subject and your teaching topics and coming up with some doable, valuable sort of blended learning approaches to start.
Yeah, some great ideas there. I'll let Ron jump in there because he's had his hand up there for a while. So Ron, are you wanting to add a comment?
Yeah, I'd like to say an excellent point was made with respect to the time being an investment that reaps benefits. I'd just like to add to that not only are the benefits primary, but there are secondary benefits. So say you make a particular, you know, your resources, whether they be podcasts, screencasts, what have you, for giving a lecture or for presenting material. What you can do at another level, there was an academic, I'll give an example, in the Faculty of Business, and she knew that, you know, in a particular subject, in a particular week, there was always a topic that students were struggling with. I think it was triangular arbitrage of currency or something like that. So she made her resources for the lecture, but she also made a Camtasia video that basically acted as a sort of a frequently asked questions, or if you're struggling with this, before you come and you know, ask me about it, because a consultation time during that particular week, you know, people would come and ask the same thing again and again. So she got preemptive, and in addition to her lecture materials, made a screencast just on that particular topic, just on those particular frequently asked questions. And she said the consultation visits dropped, and more importantly, the understanding and the evidence of that was in the assessment. It rose dramatically.
If you want to hop in there.
Yeah, thanks, Christian. I only want to make a very short point, but I think from my perspective, a really important one. When you are putting in all this extra effort, it's quite true that, you know, it's valuable long term because you can use it. But I think more importantly, for me, what it did was actually make me think about what I was teaching, how I was doing it. Was I just repeating the same stuff every semester? So it actually, even though it's a pain, it does actually make you think about your teaching, what you're teaching, how you're teaching, and I think it does give you some new enthusiasm. That's just the point I'd make.
There are some fantastic points there. Okay, we'll keep moving. Obviously, there's so much we could discuss. Unfortunately, we are limited by time. So the next thing that we wanted to briefly talk about was when would you use synchronous or asynchronous, and what are the benefits and disadvantages of those two different approaches? So obviously, we're talking both online and face-to-face.
Just really quickly, synchronous is when everybody's doing it all at the same time. You know, like when everybody's in the room together, or this collaborate session is a synchronous online activity where we're all together at the same time. Asynchronous is when people are doing things at different times. So it's with online, it's like discussion boards or you know, other ways in which students can contribute without necessarily having to synchronize their activities with the instructor or other students.
So some advantages of the synchronous approach. It's great if you wish to discuss a less complex issue. The students don't have enough time to really digest a really complex topic and reflect on it. So in a synchronous situation, it's really about what they think or where they're coming from already. So it's definitely not a great place to talk about a very complex issue. Okay, so obviously in a synchronous situation, you've got that advantage of people being there that you can interact with, so it's more interactive. It's great if you have students and you want them to plan something. So they can get in a group, they can grab the butcher's paper if they're face-to-face, or there are a lot of online tools, whiteboard tools that students can use, either within Collaborate or other tools, and students can actually write on their ideas down and share them and come up with some decisions about what they're going to do. So asynchronous situation is great for that. It's obviously perfect for group work at the same time because the group can have that more immediate sharing of information. It can also be great if they need to make a decision in a timely fashion because you've got the deadline of that face-to-face session and everyone brings their ideas in, and at the end of the session you have your decision and away you go. It can also be great for building those relationships, building acquaintance between students and the academic as well. So there are a lot of the strengths of the synchronous environment. The asynchronous environment has some other strengths, and I would probably argue they're complementary. So if you're trying to think about, well, I need to teach the students this, try and think about, well, where's that going to fit, and then that will help you make a decision about, oh, okay, well, I need a synchronous tool for that, or I'm looking for an asynchronous tool. So it's great if you want to reflect on a complex issue, because students can go and do some background reading. They can, think about it in the shower, sleep on it overnight, come back, have a conversation with their family or friends, and they have a chance to really digest it. So it's great for a complex issue where they might want to think about it for a while. But I mean, that's not to say that you couldn't have students reflect on a complex issue over a semester, and then at the end you might have a face-to-face conversation about it in a synchronous situation because the students are ready to talk about it, then they've had that opportunity to reflect. Also, it's more flexible in an asynchronous environment. Students can access it whenever they want to. They can put in as much effort as they want to, share as much as they want to. So it's a lot more flexible in that sense. There's large amounts of time available in an asynchronous environment. It's really 24/7. If the students wake up 3 AM in the morning with this brilliant idea that they want to share, they can do that. It allows for ongoing conversations, so with a discussion board or a forum, for example, so students can come back to that conversation at a later date with some new insight. And then obviously students have more time to assess and make decisions. So if you have some particular task where students need to really think about it, an asynchronous environment is going to be great for that.
I think especially as education becomes more and more international, more and more global, the scheduling issue is quite important because there could be different days, or 9 o'clock in the morning might be 2 AM somewhere else. So the asynchronous discussions do allow a more international discussion where people don't have to get up in the middle of the night. Also, in some cultures, the role of the teacher, especially in a sort of a face-to-face situation, the role is more defined as, okay, you're the empty vessel, there's an expert, there's a teacher, you shouldn't really, as a student, be talking as much. This is your opportunity to learn from the master. And in that situation, I think a lot of the students who perhaps have a more passive role, I think in an asynchronous situation, especially online, that's their chance to shine. So they may not think it's their role to have a big debate and discussion in a class of 60 students, but in a discussion board, they may not only have the time to digest and reflect, and if there's a language issue, sometimes to translate, but it allows them to have their voice.
In the context of law, for both PLT, I think, and for the master's programs where these subjects are going to be delivered, the feedback from the students, particularly students who are legal practitioners or who are doing work experience, is they would prefer asynchronous. Like they would prefer the flexibility of doing the online work at a time that's convenient for them, rather than having to make a commitment to be online for an hour or two every week at a particular time. So while I think like tools like Collaborate that we're using now are useful for occasional sessions, I think that if we're going to split our teaching between face-to-face and online, I think a lot of the online should be asynchronous.
Okay, so some negatives of synchronous or asynchronous. Some of the weaknesses is obviously scheduling that we've talked about. It has a lack of flexibility. So some students may miss out as a result of that if they're busy or they have to work or whatever might have come up, and they lose that opportunity in a synchronous environment, obviously unless you can record it and provide that to them later, which is an option. and then that brings up the whole kettle of fish is, if I record it, will they not come? Which can be a hard one to address. It's more dependent on technology working in a synchronous environment. If the technology fails, and we've had experiences in these master classes where Collaborate maybe doesn't work quite as well as we hoped, and you're really at the mercy of the technology working. So it can be more important to have a plan B in place in case things go horribly wrong. There's more preparation required as well because you're looking for a smooth session, so you need to make sure you have everything ready to go at the beginning, whereas with an asynchronous environment you may find some interesting topic, idea, conversation starts. You can really go with that. There's no restriction like there would be in a synchronous environment where you have content you need to work through, or an end goal, an end time that you need to finish the conversation by. With asynchronous, some of the weaknesses, and these can be quite major weaknesses, there's delayed feedback. So particularly if a student's trying to learn a difficult concept, you might find that without that feedback they get very frustrated. They're trying to make that calculation or understand that particular rule and how it's applied, and they don't quite get it, and so they send an email or make a conversation or a post, and then they're waiting, and they can really switch off, so they can be really disengaging for some students. There's limited interaction in an asynchronous environment because you don't have that one-to-one, face-to-face immediate response, and also there's more likely to have a form of misinterpretation can happen as well. Okay, so Olivia, you had a comment?
Yeah, Christian, I just wanted to add to that, and this was certainly something when I was involved in PLT several years ago, and it really strikes me that one of the negatives is that because students are often working, and particularly in relation to the new masters that we're putting out and PLT now, is that when they're frustrated like that, you know, and they're doing it either late at night or on a weekend, as a teacher, you have to make a decision as to whether you're going to put in that extra effort after hours. So that's something also to be aware of in terms of a weakness.
Yeah, that's a very good point. I know some academics make the decision to have like a Collaborate room or office hours available to students so that that's a defined time that students know they can ask all those questions and have that synchronous interaction. That's, you know, it's not during a lecture space, it's in a specific time when you're available to help them. So that can be one way of addressing that. I know a lot of people make Sunday night the night where they reply to students, and while they're getting busy for the week, they're in that headspace. They're thinking about what the content's going to be for the week, so some people find that a good time to reply to students. Ron, you had a comment?
Yeah, I was just wondering what people thought in terms of at the institutional levels, if the fact that, you know, we aren't working in a sort of a 9 to 5, well, I suppose it's not even 9 to 5, it's an 8 to 2, and that we aren't working in traditional lecture hours anymore, if institutions will pick that up and not have, you know, the Saturday session as extra, but rather it be part and parcel. So will we have more flexible time for academics and students? So instead of you know, working Monday to Friday regular times and then also having to do an extra session late at night one weekday or on the weekend, if there'll be situations where people, you know, have Monday off but have a online session or a virtual session on Saturday in lieu, so that the extra time out of regular time slots aren't extra.
I do respond to students all weekend and in the evenings, and they're usually quite grateful and surprised that I respond, but I appreciate that many of my students are part-time and they're working, and so the time that they want to sort of get answers is in the evening or on a Sunday night or on the weekend. But I think we do need to be careful about that whole technology creep where we're constantly on our phones. Like, there is no weekend or there is no downtime, and there's probably a really fine balance there between being able to turn off, you know, work and go home and have a break. And I'm not sure how you'd manage it as we keep progressing with this sort of blended learning environment. So that was my comment.
Yeah, that's a very good point. I don't think there's any singular answer to that. I think a lot of it depends on your approach to it. But yeah, I would agree that there's definitely, you need that downtime, that disconnect time, so that you can recharge, if nothing else. You have a life, you have all sorts of other things that you need to do, and you can't be at the beck and call of students 24/7. But that said, sometimes you can feel it. That's actually what it's like. I know a few academics who've used Twitter in the past. The students feel that they're always there, even though they're actually not, just because they feel that they have that question, they can make it straight away, they make that comment, make that connection, and then they know that person will get back to them at some stage. So sometimes online tools, particularly because students are using them all the time, they feel that there's immediate feedback, even if they're actually using it. It's just a perception that that's the case. Okay, so we're just going to move on. We don't have a huge amount of time left, but touch on two other areas, which is the first being some of the tools that we've talked about and how you might use those tools, or how you might choose those tools. So this slide here is really kind of just summarising some of the tools into different categories that we that we've discussed throughout this series of workshops. So the first one was the idea of creating videos for students. We talked about a tool called Video Scribe that I know a lot of people are really excited about using, and I'm hoping we'll get some more licenses for that software as we go through. Screencasting, that's very much our bread and butter. So the main program we've used there is Camtasia Studio, and that's great for turning a PowerPoint into a video that you can host online. So from a flipped classroom perspective, it's a great tool, and I think most people have had a chance to use that tool. If you haven't had a chance, please come and talk to us. We do have a range of masterclass sessions that we're running, both introductory and we can do more advanced sessions too on Camtasia, and a number of academics have already taken us up on that. We don't have a confirmed date for a rollout of Camtasia everywhere, but we're hoping that is going to happen before next year is the plan, hopefully. Better use of PowerPoint. Again, ILT have created a video series with some tips on PowerPoint, and we've also run a number of masterclasses on PowerPoint too. If you need some assistance with PowerPoint, please don't hesitate to contact us. I actually think the range of PowerPoint skills that I've seen since I've been at Bond is fantastic. There are a range of people out there that are really running with the ball and doing some very creative things with PowerPoint. So it might be a tool that people have used for a long period of time, but don't underestimate what you can do.
I'd just like to echo what you said regarding PowerPoint. I think there are two sides to it. One is that there are a number of exciting alternatives to PowerPoint, and every year Jane Hart, I've put in, you can see in the text chat box, every year she does a survey of educators, and if you want to go there and vote for your favorite tools, it'll be included in next year's survey. But every year she does a survey of the top 100 tools. There are some great tools listed there, but also instead of looking at some of those, sometimes it's just a case of doing different things, or maybe using PowerPoint in a different way, whether it's using hyperlinks to give a sort of a non-linear branching option to PowerPoint, or whether it's experimenting with some of the things you can add, like video or audio, or using SmartArt. So I think it's exciting that not only are there a number of really exciting alternatives to PowerPoint, but also that PowerPoint itself, as it improves and as people get more creative with it, there are a number of things that we can do within PowerPoint without going to some of those alternatives that are exciting as well.
So sound recording is another option. Commonly people refer to it as podcasting. So all you really need is a microphone.
Just to let everybody in law know that we have invested in a really good quality microphone, which is upstairs in the level 4 blended learning technology room. So that tool is available to everybody in law, and we'll be getting another one for the level 2 room, which we'll be setting up soon.
Yes, I actually checked it out yesterday. I'm very jealous. So yeah, that's a great resource. Some people are very comfortable talking, and if it's a skill that you've developed that you know, you're confident with, why not turn it into an audio file that your students can access while they're out jogging, you know, in the car. It can be just one of those extra resources that you can provide, which doesn't really take that much energy or effort to create. Can be really beneficial to your students. It's a great way for them to harness your expertise.
My question is, if I wanted to deliver some content to students and I want to show them, I want to speak at the same time, but I also want to show them, say, the iLearn site where all the material is, what's the best way to use audio and internet, like to use iLearn?
That's a good question. Again, Camtasia is a program that will enable you to do that. So Camtasia will pretty much capture anything that you can show on your computer. It doesn't just have to be a PowerPoint, although that's the way most people are comfortable using it. So if there's a program or a website or a video or anything else you want to show to your students and actually talk over the top of it, you can do that within Camtasia. It's not a problem. It's very, very easy to do.
Okay, so I guess one of my comments would be that there are almost too many options, and when you're a lecturer about to do something, it seems to be just getting over the selection process seems to be quite hard in itself. Is there a way that we could have a site or a collection of what's been used around the university so that people like me can just get on and have a look what they're doing in medicine and have a look at what their podcast looks like and view it, so we can get a feel for what would be effective in our program?
That's a very good point. We've actually had a range of conversations with a number of academics, and we're in the process of designing and creating what's going to be called a blended learning decision tool, and that will be, you have an outcome, so you want to get across to your students a particular concept, and you'll basically go into this tool, you'll make that selection, and then it will advise you what is a tool that you could use, what's it going to look like, and where are some resources so you can go and learn how to use that. So obviously that's something we want to get up as soon as possible, and we are also building a Collaborate community, and this will, most of the resources initially are going to come from this blended learning subject, so we are going to repurpose a lot of these resources in a way that it's a bit more accessible so that you can come in and access them as you need to. But it's a fantastic point. We have had that comment and that conversation a number of times, and we would definitely like to create something which is a little bit more user-friendly so you don't feel as overwhelmed for choice, because there really are a lot of options out there. So obviously back channels we've talked about, student response systems we've talked about, in video and photography, again, the idea of creating online videos for students can be really engaging, or using existing videos. So one of the other things we wanted to briefly talk about was the look and feel of an iLearn subject. Now, I can appreciate that we've put a lot of effort into creating the online blended learning subject, and I think a lot of people would be feeling, well, we're not really sure or confident how to create something like that. So after this workshop, there will be a range of resources up on the iLearn site. But as far as some simple strategies goes, you obviously want to look at chunking your content, so not having huge volumes of data just sitting on an iLearn page, making sure it's easy to navigate, making sure the subject's intuitive, and using a variety of different techniques and media. And there are some examples which will also be on the iLearn site. Every year Blackboard runs a competition to demonstrate which are the best iLearn or Blackboard related subjects. And I would definitely go and look at some of those examples. It'll give you some great ideas for what's possible within Blackboard. So quickly just some examples of that. So obviously having an orientation page, which is something that we created, which tells students about what your subject's about. Having the information at their fingertips, so a lot of students, they want to know, when do I have to be there, what's the timetable, what's the assessment. Having that information readily available to them can be really important within iLearn. And obviously to the navigation side of things, so we went to the effort of adding buttons into this iLearn subject, but you don't have to do that, but it's just something that you may consider doing that will make the subject a little bit more engaging, a little bit easier to use. One of the things which can make a big difference is setting explicit expectations for students. So this example here Oh no, I'm losing my pom-poms. This example here was from one of the business academics, and the point was to really spell out to students what the expectation was. So if you're actually integrating this flipped classroom approach, or you've got a different approach to teaching which some students may be struggling with, if you let them know exactly what they're expected to do, that can make a big difference to their buy-in or their understanding of why you're doing what you're doing. So I'm just going to skip through. Obviously, images and videos can be really useful. We talked about using icons as a way to illustrate a point. You can use them in your PowerPoint, you can use them in your iLearn site, anywhere that you think you might find it useful to use icons to reinforce the message. All of the objects that you've seen inside the iLearn site, so this example here is of a Quizlet, all of that is using something called Embed Code, and it's not as scary or as complicated as what it sounds. And there will be a video online after the session if you're interested in learning how to do that. It doesn't take that long to do, but it does make a big difference to students being able to use your subject. We did briefly talk about workload and accessing help. So I've just got some quick do's and don'ts which kind of summarize some of that conversation. Do ask and learn from others. Do recycle your content wherever possible. So we talked about the initial investment of time. Make sure that you create content that you can use again. It will save you a lot of time. Do pre-plan. Nothing can be worse than deciding to try and learn a tool and spending a lot of time on it and then realizing that you've really wasted your time. Your time is very valuable, so if you spend a little bit of time thinking about it before you start, or asking us for help, some ideas, I'm interested in doing this, how long is that going to take me to do? That's fine. Be realistic, take those baby steps. You don't have to completely change the subject overnight. It's fine to just do one or two little things. Access to help and support, that's what we're here for. Have a plan B, can be very useful if things go horribly wrong. And begin with sound pedagogy. So we've talked about that and the whole idea of the constructive alignment, making sure that your subject makes sense to your students and the assessment matches up with the content that you've covered is one of those really important things that makes a huge difference. That you're not wasting your time giving students resources they're not going to use or that aren't appropriate. So some don'ts. Don't try to do everything. I think we all tend to fall into that boat at one time or another, and we try and do everything and burn the midnight oil and everything, but you can't do that sustainably. So, take it easy on yourself, realize when you've reached that limit. Don't downplay the importance of using your existing skills. If you're a fantastic orator and your face-to-face sessions are very engaging for your students, harness that, use that as you can. Don't just decide, oh, well, I'm going to go and try and do this fully online course or put all my resources online. Use the skills that you have. Don't overcommit. And again, that can be a hard thing if you're new to blended learning. You don't realize how long it's going to take you to do something until you've actually done it. But yeah, so be aware of that. Don't do it all on your own. Team up with other colleagues. Maybe there's something you can work on together. Don't fear the unknown. It can be very scary, particularly if you're not computer savvy. So to walk into this new world of blended learning and just feel a little bit lost, and that's okay. It's like learning anything. It's going to feel unfamiliar at first. I've talked briefly before about don't reinventing the wheel. There's plenty of resources you can use already out there that can save you a lot of time and energy. Try not to get discouraged. There will obviously be good days and bad days, and don't compromise your standards either. So if you know something's not going to work, rather than just fumbling through, sometimes it's better just to take a step back and try something different. This is probably the last thing I really want to talk about, and that is needing help with iLearn. A lot of people don't seem to be aware, within iLearn itself, within your subject, on the right, left-hand side down the bottom, there's actually a help button there, and that will actually you can go straight through to ITS. There's also the Help for Educators, which is also at the top of iLearn, where it says Educator iLearn Support. There's a range of videos and tutorials, so definitely look through some of those tutorials and videos. You might find them useful. And there's also video tutorials which are on the iLearn at Bond website, and there is a link at the left-hand side of any iLearn course. So there's videos from RLT, and there's also videos from ITS on how to use iLearn and how to use blended learning. So those resources are really there to help you. And like I said, hopefully in the future, well, near future, we will have a Blackboard Collaborate community there, which will provide some resources for you, so you'll be able to go along and look for what you're interested in, or if there's something missing, contact us and we'll definitely add it. So that is definitely one of the things that we hope to create, and that's one of the things which will come out of this series of workshops, which we've been very excited to develop and present to you. So that's pretty much all I have to say. Is there any comments or any questions that people had regarding blended learning before we wrap up?
First of all, this is, of course, the last workshop that we're running for this blended learning program. After the workshop, we'll post the recording of this particular session, plus a whole bunch of other useful resources for everyone. And then we're going to reformat the whole iLearn site to make it into a kind of site that anyone in the faculty can use to teach themselves about blended learning. So I guess my final words are going to be, I've been absolutely delighted with the way this series of workshops has gone. I've been very happy with the people that have been coming along every week, and I'm especially grateful to the enormous amount of work that's been done by Christian, by Ron, by Justin, and by Sarah, and the team over at OLT. So I just wanted to express gratitude on behalf of the faculty to the enormous amount of work that they've done. So thank you so much, guys. You've been absolutely magnificent.
I just wanted to say thanks also, and thanks to Nick and Libby and everyone at Law. I think Law is one of those faculties that's proactive, it's energetic, and it has certainly taken a leadership role, and good on you for that.
Great, thanks Ron. It's actually been a real pleasure working with the law faculty through this series of workshops, and we've had some really good conversations. I think we've really appreciated the feedback that we've received, and also some of the input too, some of the stories that have been shared. It can be really personal talking about what happens in your classroom, and I really appreciate those people who've had that opportunity to share some of what's happened to them. And I suppose my last comment would be, I think we're just really getting started, and looking forward to working with everyone in the future.